So this is part two of my previewing the entire ACC. If you want to see part one, it's already up on my channel. Part one covers Boston College, Stanford, North Carolina, Syracuse, Wake Forest, Duke, Florida State, and Georgia Tech. So the longest shots to win it. This part is going to highlight what I would consider the kind of more favored to win, I guess, because it does favor a couple teams that are pretty low odds, but it features Cal, NC State, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Pitt, Clemson, Louisville, SMU, and Miami, Florida. In this video, it's just like the last one. We're going to be highlighting really three main things: your head coach, your quarterback, and your schedule. I think to me those are the three keys when we talk about not only winning the ACC but hitting your win total, because we're going to use your odds to win the conference, and also we look at every team's win total, their over under, because I think that gives us a good idea of what their expectation coming into the year is. Because so just so you know, like I'm not setting this expectation, I'm basing it off of what the odds makers are saying. I think that gives us an idea of what the expectation is for each of these teams. So this is part two. Part one is already up. So the next team up is Cal. Cal is sitting at plus 4,000 to win the ACC. Again, they have a over under of 6.5. So again, they are projected to be a bowl eligible team. We look at last year, 2025 Cal. A little bit of an interesting year. Started the year off 3-0, including wins against Minnesota and at Oregon State, but then they got blown out at San Diego State. Followed that up with a win at Boston College, lost to Duke, beat North Carolina, lost to Virginia Tech, lost to Virginia, beat Louisville, lost at Stanford, beat SMU. And the reason I read that out is because that should give you a good idea. It was very up and down all last year. The talent was definitely there, and the talent starts with their starting quarterback from last year, JKS. As a true freshman last year, 3,400 yards, 64% completion percentage, 18 TDs, 9 interceptions. Throughout the year, he showed you flashes of just being a really great quarterback. Against SMU, he was 31 for 40, 334 TDs. At Louisville, 30 for 47, 63% completion percentage, 2 TDs, no picks. But he also looked human against Virginia, 19 for 30, 200 yards, 2 picks. So it was definitely very up and down. But if we look here, I mean, look at the end of this year, right? At Hawaii, the game they lost, 28 for 39, 337, 31 for 40, like I said, against SMU, 334 TDs, no picks. Uh, Consistently was above 60% and 200 to 300 passing yards with some TDs coming down the stretch. So it was very good to end the year for him. Now, so looking at Cal last year, they under Justin Wilcox they were 6-5, and then obviously fired him after that 6-5 start. They were 86 out of 136 in points per game and 82nd out of 136 in opponents' points per game. So they were below average in both offense or defense scoring wise. And so that brings us to who they decided to bring in. They decided to bring in Tosh Lupi, is what I call him, Tosh Lupi, who was the defensive coordinator at Oregon last year. So a very, highly sought after kind of coordinator. He played at Cal, was at Cal actually to start his career as a D-line coach before going to Washington, and then had stops at Alabama, Cleveland, Atlanta, Jacksonville, and then Oregon as a D linebacker coach and D coordinator. And now he's going to be the head coach there at Cal. So looking ahead to this upcoming season, looking at the schedule, week one is such a huge game because I think for both Cal and UCLA, they're bringing in new coaching staffs, but bringing in the same quarterbacks. So both teams kind of have high hopes, and I think that week one game is going to tell you a lot about both teams. And then they go at Syracuse and then Wagner. They got Clemson at home, at UNLV, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, at SMU, at NC State, at Virginia, Stanford, Pitt. So it is a rather difficult schedule, even though they do not play Miami, they do not play Louisville, right? They're out of conference. It's interesting. You get or UCLA out of conference, you get Wagner out of conference, you get UNLV out of conference. So it's interesting out of conference. Really, this team, this stretch right here of Wake Forest at home, at SMU, at NC State, bye week, and then at Virginia will probably make or break their year. I think all four of those teams, and even Virginia Tech at home, all those teams are going to be solid and right around where I think Cal wants to be. So the big question coming into the year is can Tosh Lupi turn around that defense? Offensively, it's going to be, hey, we're going to hope to have JKS kind of continue to ascend. I mean, he looked incredible at points last year as a true freshman. And remember, he is a true freshman. In 2 years, he might be the first quarterback off the board in the NFL draft. So that's going to be the big question with him. Can he grow? And then can Tosh Lupi turn around this defense, which was 82nd out of 136 in points given up per game, wasn't very good. And offensively, they were 86 out of 136 in terms of scoring per game. So also not very good. Real quick, looking at their offensive coordinator, it's Jordan Somerville. Um, if I just here, we can pull him up real quick. Don't know much about him. He was at Tampa Bay this past year, so he's kind of coming in without much of a known thing on him, I guess. He was at New Mexico, Oregon as an offensive assistant. I really don't know much about him, so, we'll see. And I think that's a lot with the Cal staff. It's just a let's wait and see. I do like some of the pieces they got, and I think there's some hope for this team. I do think they'll be right around that 6-win total. Like I said, that out of that schedule, it's not the most difficult thing, but I feel like a lot of the teams they play are right around their skill level. Like I have them kind of similar to Virginia and similar to a UCLA and a Virginia Tech. I think they're and Wake Forest. I think all of them are around the same to me. So it's going to be very interesting. And 6.5, I think, is a really good number. I lean the under. I think they're going to be right at 6-6 though. So the next team up is NC State, and they're plus 2,500 to win the ACC. And actually, if you notice, it is a pretty big gap between NC State and Cal in terms of winning the ACC. So that should kind of tell you that I think there's a lot more trust in this NC State program, and for a good reason. They have an over/under of 7.5 wins, so it is a very high bar. And again, we'll get into why though in a second. So looking at last year 8-win team. They went 8-5, including a bowl game win. Started the year 3-0, and then they kind of, I would say, stumbled a little bit. Had a very rough middle of this season where they lose at Duke, they lose against Virginia Tech, beat Campbell, lose at Notre Dame, and then lose at Pitt, but really picked it up there towards the end. They won 3 of their last 4 games, beat Georgia Tech, lost at Florida pretty bad, but then beat Florida State and beat North Carolina, and then won their bowl game against Memphis. So it was a very good end of the season, and so they're going to look to hope to carry that kind of end of the season into this year. Looking at NC State last year, pretty good offense. They scored 30 points a game. That ranks 45 out of 136. Gave up 27 a game, ranked 83rd out of 136. So should give you a pretty good idea. Looking at their head coach, he has been at NC State for quite some time. This is going to be year number 14 at NC State. He is 95-70 at NC State. And I think why that total is so high is if you look here, he has not had a losing season since 2019. They went 4-8 in 2019, and from 2020 onward, they have won 8 or more. Or sorry, in 2024 they did go 6-7, but keep in mind that's with a bowl game loss, so they finished 6-6. And from 2020 onwards, they actually won 8 or more games every year except for 2024. So that should give you a pretty good idea of just how good NC State has been under Dave Doran, their head coach. And he has continued this success throughout. And they are going to have C.J. Bailey at quarterback. Now, C.J. Bailey, this is going to be year 3 at NC State as their starting quarterback. His freshman year, 2,400 yards, 17 TDs, 10 interceptions, and a 65% completion percentage, and then a pretty big leap in year 2 where he goes 69% completion percentage, 3,100 yards, 25 TDs, 9 interceptions. In terms of rushing, he has some rushing ability, 279, 5 TDs his first year, 215 yards and 6 TDs his second year. So again, there is some rushing ability there, but I think if you are a looking at NC State, you have to feel good like, hey, that jump from year 1 to year 2 was pretty big. What if we get another jump from year 2 to year 3? They could be a very dangerous team. Looking ahead at their schedule, it is an interesting schedule. So they open the year at Virginia, and last year that was a very good game in which they won. And then a bye week, and then they get Richmond at Vandy and Appalachian State. Then they get Louisville at home, Wake Forest at home, a bye week before they go at Stanford, Cal, Duke, Syracuse, at Florida State, and at North Carolina. So the one thing to note about that schedule is it seems very easy. They don't play Miami. They don't play SMU. Um, Again, those are the top 2 teams to win the whole thing. They don't play Pitt. They don't play Clemson. So it seems like they do skate around a lot of the top kind of in conference opponents. And in their out of conference schedule, Appalachian State's usually a pretty good program, but I think they'll be able to take care of business there. Richmond should be a pretty easy one. At Vandy is a very interesting game. They're going to have a new quarterback, a lot of new there at Vandy, so they could be dangerous. But I do think NC State can really win that game. So a 7.5 win total is it is a little high, but you have to keep in mind this is a team that under Dave Doran has just year in year out. Again, looking at Dave Dorn's records here, year in year out, they are always seemingly around that 8-9 win mark. They don't really go over 9 wins, but they always seem to kind of find their way to 8 wins. He's had 8 or 9 wins most years he's been at NC State, and they've been a very good program every year he's been there. So this is a very good NC State team this year. Again, looking at their team, last year they scored 30 a game. Honestly, I think they might score even more this year. They could be up at 31, 32, maybe even 33 points a game. And against this schedule, I think that's good enough for 8, maybe even 9 wins competing to win the ACC. Out of all the teams we've done so far, this is the first team I feel like has a real shot to actually win the ACC, and they might even be a little undervalued because I think they might even be better than the next two teams we're talking about. So that's NC State in a nutshell. So the next team up is Virginia Tech. They're actually sitting at plus 2,200 to win the ACC, but interesting enough, they're over under 6.5. So NC State, who's below them, actually has a game more of a over under. So just a little interesting fact there. Looking at 2025 Virginia Tech, a lot went wrong. They went 3-9. Their only three wins were to Wofford, NC State, and a double OT Cal win. Losses, they lost to Old Dominion. That was a really bad one. Lost to Vandy, South Carolina, Wake Forest, Georgia Tech, Louisville, at Florida State, and Miami, and at Virginia. So it was a very much a down year for Virginia Tech, and that led to what ended up happening, which was they fired their head coach Brett Pry. If we look at their offense, they ranked 114th in college football, 21 points per game, and defensively they weren't very good either. Gave up 30 a game, ranked 106. Obviously, again, they fired Brent Pry after 3 games. After that Old Dominion loss, they lost 45 to 26. They decided to let him go. So insert James Franklin. James Franklin, of course, got fired from Penn State after a very, very, very bad start where they went 3-3. But it is undeniable what he was able to do at Penn State in 12 seasons there. He went 104 and 45, and before that, he was at Vandy for 3 years, where he went 24 and 15, and it was one of the better kind of stretches, 3-year stretches for Vandy, where he won 9 games twice at Vandy. So that is just something to keep in mind. And as an added bonus, Brent Pry, who was their former head coach, is coming back as a defensive coordinator, which, if you look at Virginia Tech, even just in 2024, they actually ranked pretty good. They gave up 22.8 points per game and ranked 39th in opponents' points per game. So defensively, he can coach. He was a defensive coordinator for 5 years at Penn State, and some other places he was a defensive coach, and obviously now they're bringing him as a defensive coordinator. So now that brings up who is going to be their starting quarterback, and it's looking like all signs are pointing to Ethan Grunkmeyer, who was actually at Penn State last year. He played in 11 games, 69% completion percentage, 1,300 yards, 8 TDs, 4 interceptions. So after Drew Aller went down with a knee injury, he came in and was the starter there. So he's got some experience. If you look at it, actually, he played in the Ohio State game, played in the Iowa game, and wasn't very good in those 2 games, but that's some big time experience. Against Indiana, he was solid. He was 22 for 31, 219 yards, a TD, and an interception in a game Penn State was very close to winning. He didn't really have any a lot of chances to shine. They didn't really give him a lot of chances to go do what he wanted. But in the bowl game, he did pretty good. 23 for 34, 68%, 260, 2 TDs, no picks. So he's got some experience at a big time level. And we bring that up because if you look at this schedule, it is it is kind of difficult. They're out of schedule, out of conference is pretty. It starts easy, right? You got VMI, you got Old Dominion. If they lose to Old Dominion 2 years in a row, I think James Franklin might get fired right then and there. Um, Kidding, of course, but it really does feel that way. Then they go at Maryland, uh, and then at Boston College. So their first 4 games aren't very difficult, and that's really going to set the tone for the whole year. It feels like if they want to, go and actually compete for the ACC this year, that has to be 4-0 right there. They have to get to a good start because these last 8 games are pretty difficult. They then come home against Pitt, who's going to be, who I will talk about in a second. I think is going to be really good. At Cal, who obviously new head coach, and they got JKS. That should be a tough one. Georgia Tech, who Brent Key, we talked about him, and just how he usually has that program pretty good. At Clemson, that's going to be a tough one before bye week. And then at SMU, who we'll get to later. They're one of the favorites in the whole conference. Stanford, who's pretty much the only, what I would consider, kind of poor team in this stretch. And then at Miami and then Virginia to end the year. So it is a very, very difficult end of the year here. Those last 8 weeks is going to be pretty grueling for just a first year program. So it is so important that they win these first 4 games and do it easily. They have to build confidence for Ethan Grunkmeyer early, get him ready to win. But all things considered, this team does have potential. James Franklin, it's been one of the top transfer portal classes of any team. He's bringing in a lot of talent, especially from Penn State. He's got a really good coaching staff. He had Brent Pry stay on as defensive coordinator, so there are a lot of things that do give you confidence in Virginia Tech. However, personally, I think this is going to be just the first step for James Franklin. If we go back, his first year of Vandy was 6-7. His first year at Penn State was 7-6, and that was with the bowl win. Both years he started 6-6 in the regular season, and that's kind of what I see from Virginia Tech this year. I see a 6-6 years where you kind of see moments of this program coming back to what they were. If we go and look at the history of Virginia Tech here, before Brent Pry, it was a very good history. Frank Beamer had this team winning. They were in a bowl game every year from 1993 all the way up until 2019. They had a very good bowl streak that ended, of course, in 2020, but that was due to COVID, some would say. And then in 2021, it was again another, what I would consider lackluster season before bringing in Brent Pry. And then he, of course, he did have some success in 2023 and 2024, but last year he just couldn't cut it. And so the hope is you can get back to where they were, in the early 2000s. I mean, look at this stretch from 2004 all the way up until 2011. They won 10 or more games every single year. So the hope is to get back to that. But in order to get back to that, it's going to take some time to build a foundation. I think this is the year to build that foundation. The goal of this year should just be, hey, let's compete. Let's maybe go give Miami a game or give SMU a game. Just make sure we can show up in the big games because if you remember, that's kind of been James Franklin's whole thing. He never performs in the big game. So I think for this year, I do think it's a 6-6 year. I do think they're a little overvalued in this. I mean, plus 2,200. I don't think they're better than a team at NC State or even maybe, I think they should be more towards Cal's odds. But I do think I can see the vision for how this team can be good. And I do think that James Franklin will be a very good coach for Virginia Tech for years to come. I just think this is a building year rather than a year where they get actual results. Next up, we have Virginia. Virginia is plus 1,900 to win the ACC. Looking at their over-under, it's set at 7.5 wins. And looking at 2025, it was an 11-win season. And they opened up the year against Coastal Carolina and won and actually lost their second game of the year at NC State. They then would proceed to win a bunch of games in a row, right? William and Mary, Stanford, a double OT win against Florida State, an OT win against at Louisville, uh, a 2-point win against Washington State, an OT win at North Carolina. At Cal, they won by 10. Ended up losing to Wake Forest before winning at Duke and against Virginia Tech. But I think the big knock was they had a chance. ACC title game. They win. They're in the college football playoff, and they lost in overtime against Duke and ended up having to go play Missouri in a bowl game and ended up winning that game by 6. But the big concern for me is when you look at last year, it's look at how many overtime games they played in. Ended up playing in 4 overtime games, and it's not like the teams. Yes, Louisville was a very good team, but overtime game against Duke, who were solid, but I would expect Virginia to take care of them a little better. At North Carolina, a 1 point overtime win against Florida State, who had a really rough year, overtime win. So it just felt like a lot of close games in a 2 point win against Washington State, who they probably shouldn't have been in that close of a game with. They played a lot of these games close. So that's my concern with last year. Looking at it, they ranked actually top 40 in both off points per game and opponents' points per game. Scored 31 a game, that was 38th, and gave up about 19 and a half for 22nd. So they were pretty solid both on offense and defense. Looking at Tony Elliott, it was year 4 for him, and I would say going into the year he was on the hot seat a little bit, right? He was 3-7 in 2022, 3-9 in 2023, and 5-7 in 2024. So there was a little bit of like expectation to keep improving, or he was going to be gone, and he responded in a big way with an 11-3 win, or 11-3 year. And even though yes, it ended poorly because again, if they had won that Duke game, they would have been in the college football playoff. Instead, they were sent to go play Missouri in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl. So, this year I think there's a little more hope for, hey, maybe we can build off last year, continue that success, and get in the college football playoff this year. And so their starting quarterback is going to be Pro- Prabula. Sorry, I'm terrible at pronunciations, but Bo was at Missouri last year. He was at Penn State the year before. And last year at Missouri, I just wasn't very impressed. I mean, I know they're bringing him in, and last year it's not like Virginia had a crazy good quarterback play. They had Chandler Morris, who went for 3,000 yards, 16 TDs, 9 interceptions. So he rushed for 245 and 5 TDs. It wasn't like that he was just killing it in terms of quarterback play, but I'm not a big fan of Bo. I don't know why they decided this was their guy the whole time. Yes, he played in big games. If we look at his schedule, he played against Alabama, played against LSU, Auburn, Vandy, Oklahoma. So I guess the hope is that he has this big time SEC experience that could translate in an easier conference in the ACC. But if you really look at it, they didn't. He never really had that game. That game you can stick to and say, yes, this is what we're getting. Yes, the first 2 games he did play really good. 23 for 28, 82%, 280, 2 TDs. But he did that against Central Arkansas. And then 30 for 39, 77%, 334, 3 TDs, no picks. He did that against Kansas. Right when he got into SEC play, he never really had a game that you can point to and say, hey, this was a great game. They kind of always played it safe, and it felt like he was always the reason for the poor performances, if anything. So yes, there's hope. Maybe in an easier ACC, he'll do better, but I'm a little more skeptical. And looking at their schedule, it's an interesting schedule. They open the year against NC State. That's going to be a big time week 1 game. That's an ACC game last year. It was weird actually. If you look at it last year, they lost this game, but still got into the ACC title game on some technicalities that I still don't really truly understand. That wasn't technically a conference game when it happened, or there was some whole thing about that. But this year, I think it is a conference game, so there's that. And then they get Norfolk State, West Virginia, and Delaware. So very key non-conference stretch there where I think they're expecting to go 3-0, especially after the year you had last year. Then they get at Florida State, Syracuse, at SMU, Duke, at Wake Forest, Cal, North Carolina, and at Virginia Tech. So it's not the most difficult schedule you've ever seen, but I go back to 2025 and I point out again, they had an overtime game at North Carolina, who was not a good team last year. Overtime game, double overtime game against Florida State, a 2-point win against Washington State that was close and down to the wire. They played it very close last year in a lot of what I would consider easier games. So, just with that being said, when I see a team one year play all these games so close, I end up feeling that the next year, those results don't go their way as much and it ends up being a disappointment. So, they're sitting there. Uh, they're plus 1900. They're actually tied with Pitt for the 5th best odds to win the ACC. And I just really don't see it. I think it's a good team, but I don't think it's of that tier that we're about to get to. I think they are a step down from all the teams. I think they're really more in that NC State tier. And actually, I think NC State's a better team than them. Again, I would lean the under. I think they go about 7-5, maybe even 6-6 with this schedule. I think they lose that first game to NC State. I think games like at SMU and at Virginia Tech, at Wake Forest should all be very interesting. And just watching them last year, it felt like they would constantly slip up when you would think that they were going to take off. I just don't think they get as many of those games to go their way. So Virginia should be a very interesting team coming off that 11 win year, but I'll believe it when I see it. So next team up is Pitt. Pitt is also plus 1900 to win the ACC like Virginia. They also have an over/under sat at 7.5. They went 8-5 last year. And what I want to point out about Pitt is they started the year 2-0 before losing at West Virginia in overtime by 7, and then followed that up with a loss against Louisville. And then they would then go on to win 5 games in a row against Boston College, at Florida State, at Syracuse, NC State, and at Stanford, and all while putting up 30 or more in every single one of those games. They were then off. They then lost to Notre Dame before beating Georgia Tech, losing against Miami, and then it was a poor performance in the bowl game against East Carolina to end the year. But what I want to point out is after this Louisville game is when the change was made and they put in their true freshman, Mason Hein, as I call him because I can't say his last name. Mason Hein is Heinschkel, I think is how you pronounce it, but I just call him Mason Hein. Mason Hein took over in this Boston College game, and from there, they had a 5 game stretch of putting up 30 or more every game, and it was direct. So, looking at 2025 Pitt, they scored 33.7 points per game, which ranked 20th in the NCAA, and gave up 24.8, which ranked 68th. Of course, they started the year with Eli Holdenstein. He just wasn't very good. If you know, 1,000 yards, 12 TDs, 6 interceptions, 62% completion percentage. It just wasn't very good, and that's when Mason Hine took over. 63.6%, 2,300 yards, 16 TDs, 8 interceptions. Keep in mind he was a freshman last year, so that is a lot of hope that he can continue to improve like he did last year. Uh, Pat Narduzzi is the head coach, and really, one of the things I want to point out is they have won 8 or more games 6 times in the 11 years he's been at Pitt. So it's been a lot of success there at Pitt for Pat Narduzzi, and he's 80 and 61 in 11 seasons going into year 12. So it's been a program that he has gone over the top a lot, had a lot of success at, and this year really does feel like Mason Heinstuhl, or Hein as I call him, is going to be the key to this team. Again, 2,300 yards, 64% completion percentage, 16 TDs, 8 interceptions as a freshman last year. So, looking at his game stats, there were some real highs against Boston College 300 yards, 4 TDs, no picks, 73% completion percentage. Against Georgia Tech, 74% completion percentage, 226, 2 TDs, no picks. Against North NC State, 400 yards, 3 TDs, no picks. 58% completion percentage. And then at Stanford, he was 60.5%, 300 yards, 3 TDs, 2 picks. And then there were, of course, some lows. At Notre Dame, he looked really bad 16 for 33, 126, no TDs, 1 pick. Against Miami, he wasn't very good 199, 1 TD, 1 pick. And in the bowl game, he played East Carolina, and just the whole team didn't play well 256, 1 TD, 1 pick. So there was definitely some up and downs, but the hope is he's coming into his sophomore year and he can just improve and take them over the top. Remember, they had a 7.5 win total, and they start the year. I would say their first 7 games of the year are very winnable, all 7. They go Miami of Ohio, UCF, Syracuse, Bucknell, and then at Virginia Tech, North Carolina, and at Boston College. So they're at home 5 of their first 7 games. And honestly, I would say they're probably going to be favored in all 7 of those games. It is very possible, and I'm even predicting that they start this year, next year, 7-0, going into that at Miami, Florida game. Now that's going to be a very, very, very tough game. Miami's going to be very good again, and we'll get into them later. They're the favorites to win the ACC. They got they got just an explosive offense there at Miami, but I think Pitt is going to be much improved offensively too. So I think anything can happen. They then get Georgia Tech at home before a bye week, Florida State at home, at Louisville, and at Cal to finish the year. So those first 7 games are going to make or break Pitt. I honestly think they could be 7-0, like I said, going into that Miami game, and I think they will be 7-0. And then I think they can beat Georgia Tech, Florida State. And then I think that also they can beat at Cal. So let's say they finish the year 10-2. It's very possible they could be in the college football playoff, or at least in that conversation, even with the loss at Miami. And then it's just, hey, can you beat at Louisville and get to that ACC championship game? So Pitt to me is a team that's gone under the radar a little bit. I don't really understand why. I think out of all the teams we've done, 1900 feels a little low. I think they should be more like plus 1,000 to win the ACC. I think they should definitely be ahead of Clemson, and we'll get into Clemson. So, a lot of success last year, especially when they made the quarterback change, and I have a lot of confidence that Pitt will go in and surprise a lot of people this year. They're starting the year for me in my top 25 personally, and I think they're going to be a very good team. So the next team up is Clemson, and Clemson, they're sitting with a win total of 7.5 as well. Now, last year, Clemson was a very interesting team. They went 7-6 on the dot. They opened the year with obviously the loss to LSU, beat Troy, but then they lost to Georgia Tech, lost to Syracuse, beat North Carolina, beat Boston College, lost to SMU, lost to Duke, and then they ended with four straight wins: Florida State, Louisville, Furman, South Carolina, before losing their bowl game. So it was just a very interesting year in general from Clemson. Last year, their offense ranked 72nd in points per game, scoring 27. Defensively, they were still a very good team. 20 and a half opponents points per game, 31st in the country. I think one of the problems is since Trevor Lawrence has left Clemson, it really feels like their quarterback play has just not been there. Meanwhile, the two quarterbacks they've had since Trevor Lawrence have been former five stars. Looking at Dabo Swinney in general, his success cannot be questioned, right? In 18 seasons at Clemson, he's gone 187 and 53, 10 win seasons out of, from 2011 all the way till 2022. They won 10 or more games every single year. And 2025 was their first 7 win season or less since 2010. And he's only had 2 years of 7 or less, 2010 and 2025, and 2008 when he took over, but only was in 7 games. So again, the success of Dabo can't be questioned, but you can start to question as a program, what is Clemson going to look like? The talent is on the roster, right? Consistently, they rank towards the top of high school recruiting class, but they really have not translated to the portal era. The projected starter is Christopher Vizina, and no shock, he is somebody who was on the team last year. He backed up Cade Klubnik, and in the 5 games he appeared in, he went 45 for 71, 63%, 400 yards, 4 TDs, 1 pick. So I think one of the big concerns with Clemson is just that offensively they just really haven't been as good as you would expect, right? We look at 2024 as this loads. Uh, we look at 2024, they ranked 18th. They scored 34.7 points per game. And Cade Klubnik was a lot better, but last year it just didn't translate the way you would hope, right? It was 72nd, even with Cade Klubnik going into a year where a lot of people thought he would put himself in the Heisman talks and everything, and it just didn't feel like it was the same Clemson that we're used to. So the question is, was last year a fluke year, or is it going to be the new norm at Clemson? Some people would say Dabo might be a little bit on the hot seat. I would disagree. I don't see a world where Dabo gets fired. I think it's more likely that he decides to retire because he doesn't want to deal with the transfer portal because he obviously has no interest in getting transfers into Clemson. We look at their schedule, it is a difficult schedule, right? They open the year at LSU. Obviously, they got Lane Kiffin and a much improved team before Georgia Southern, North Carolina, at Cal, and Miami. So within the first 5 weeks, they're going to play two teams who are probably top 10, right? LSU, who I do think when the season opens will be ranked inside the top 10, and then Miami, who by that time I do expect to still be a top 10 team. So 2 times within the first 5 games, and a game at Cal. They're going to be going that East Coast to West Coast trip, which is always very, very difficult for any team. If we look at 2025, they really didn't have to make that trip. They got to play. Uh, they didn't have to make that East Coast to West Coast trip. So in 26, that's going to be something to watch. I mean, like I said, Cal is a much improved team. They got a new head coach. They got JKS, and that East Coast to West Coast is brutal on most teams. After the bye week, they get Charleston, which is nice, and then they get Virginia Tech, at Florida State, at Syracuse, Georgia Tech, at Duke, and South Carolina. So honestly, the end part of their schedule is not difficult at all. Their last 7 games, they're playing a very winnable schedule. I talk about favored, and they're probably going to be favored in all 7 of those games to win every single game. It's just really going to come down to their season. This first 5 games, I could see a world where they're 2-3 in the first 5. I could see a world where they lose at Cal in an upset. Right? We saw it last year. They started very slow. They started the year 1-3, including losses at Georgia Tech and against Syracuse. And then kind of after that, even though yes, they finished the year very good, that 1-3 start put them in the hole so early that they just weren't able to recover to kind of put themselves in a position to go play for an ACC title game and an eventual college football playoff spot. So the question is, can they get ahead of that this year, figure it out early? Because again, you're getting LSU week 1, you're getting Cal week 4 at Cal, East Coast to West Coast, and you're getting Miami week 5. The win total being 7.5 is something that I would say, hey, is very doable, right? Again, those last 7 games, I think they probably go 5-2 at worst in those last 7 games. I could see, South Carolina giving them some problems, Shane Beamer, Lenore Sellers, but by that point, who knows? Shane Beamer might be fired by then. He's a coach who's got a lot to prove this year with that roster. Uh, and at Florida State could give him some problems, right? I talked about Florida State. I don't think they're going to be very good, but the talent on that roster is unquestionable. And looking back at 2025, I think a lot of people didn't think Syracuse would beat them week 4, but they did, right? Duke beat them by 146-45 late in the season. So it's not like this team has been that unbeatable team that we're used to, that we saw for a decade. So I will be very curious to watch Clemson football. They're going to be one of the stories throughout the year. Can they kind of return to the relevance they had? Or is last year the new norm and maybe Dabo considers retirement or he considers adjusting his ways and hitting the portal a little harder than he has hit it. And just to note one last thing about Clemson, they did get 11 transfers this year, so it has, they've bringing in 11 new players from the transfer portal. So it's not like he's refusing to go to the portal, but definitely I think if this year doesn't endure more success, I think you're going to see them hit that portal maybe a little bit harder than they have been, or we could potentially be seeing Dabo maybe just say, "Hey, I'm done with this transfer portal stuff. I don't want to do it. I just want to, retire." And because again, looking at Dabo just as a coach, this is year number 19 for him. He's unquestionably been one of the best coaches we've seen in college football history. Right, has won 2 national titles, have been in 4 national title games, and even just going back in 2024, they were in the college football playoff. Granted, I don't they weren't great that year, but they still were in it. And so, I think this year it's just going to tell us a lot about the future of Clemson. So it's such an important year for Dabo and just the program in general. With the third best odds to win the ACC, we got Louisville. They're sitting at plus 800 and over under total of 8.5. So Louisville, if we look at last year, they went 9-4, and it was a very great year. I mean, they started 4-0 before a overtime loss against Virginia. They actually went at Miami and beat them, but 3 losses in a row late the year against Cal, Clemson, and at SMU really derailed their season. They would rebound to end the year, beating Kentucky 41-0 and beating Toledo 27-22 in the bowl game. But that 3 game stretch really stuck with them because if they can just beat Clemson and beat Cal, they're in the ACC title game and competing for a chance to go to the college football playoff. But the wheels really fell off the year right there, and you can point to that and say, hey, they got to be better. And looking at 2025 real quick, they ranked above average in both offense and defense, right? 29.9 points per game, ranked 46, and 21.2 opponents' points per game, ranked 38th. You go back to 2024, where they again won 9 games, and the offense was a lot better. It was ninth in college football, 36.5, and 24 with uh, opponents' points per game at 56. So both years they have been above average on defense, and in 2024 they were a lot better on offense versus this past year where they were above average. Looking at Jeff Brom, the thing that should stick out to you is he's been at Louisville now for 3 years. This is going to be year 4, and every year he's been great. He had 10 wins in 23. And in 24 he had 9, and in 25 he had 9. So he has been great every year. And even going back to Purdue, right? He went 36-34 at Purdue, a little over 500, which maybe doesn't sound great, but keep in mind, since he has left Purdue, they have not finished over 500. Actually, the last 2 years they've been really really bad. They haven't won a conference game in 2 years. So since Jeff Brom has left there, they have not been good at all. The big concern for me for Louisville is who they're going for their projected starting quarterback, and that's Lincoln Kienholz. So Lincoln was at Ohio State last year. Now Lincoln was a big time recruit. So I think he was a 4-star if I remember correctly, but he has just not played for real. Now, granted, at Ohio State they've had some really great quarterbacks, right? They had Sayin, they had Will Howard. I don't think he didn't pass with C.J. Stroud. I don't think, or McCord, or no, in 23 I think McCord was there, and then obviously Will Howard and Julian Sain last year. So he's always had somebody good in front of him, but I just don't know about him as a player. We really haven't seen him, right? Last year, 11 for 14 in 7 games he appeared, 139 yards TD, no picks. Rushing wise, he had 11 attempts, 66 yards, and 2 TDs. So what you are getting from Lincoln is a dual threat quarterback. He is a dual threat. He is he's a big time. Yeah, like I said, he was a big time prospect. So the potential is there, but he is an unproven commodity. We have not seen anything of note, right? Every year was always like, hey, maybe he's going to compete for the starting job, and he never really did. Looking ahead at their schedule, it's a difficult schedule to start the year, especially. Look at these first 3 games. They open the year against Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss, new coaching staff, but it's going to be Trinidad and Lacey there as well. So Ole Miss, they got their stars coming back. So while it is a new coaching staff, they're coming off a college football playoff berth where they did very well. Then they get Villanova and then SMU that third game of the year. So a very, very, very difficult opener to open the year. But if you actually look at in 2025, they opened the year very well, right? Started 4-0 before that Virginia loss. And even if you go back to 2024, you'll notice something if it'll load. Again, they started 3-0 before a 7-point loss at Notre Dame and a 7-point loss against SMU. So, in 2023 is the last year we'll look at because that was the first year Jeff Brom got there. And again, you're going to notice it was a really good start, right? Beat Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, Boston College, NC State, and Notre Dame to start the year. You're right, started very well and then ended well less well. They lost to Kentucky in the last week of the season, lost in the ACC title game. So that is one of the concerns I've had with Jeff Brom, is it seems like his teams lose a little steam coming, when the year kind of comes to the end of it. But that might be a good thing this year because 2 of your first 3 games are against really good teams. Now, after that SMU game, they've played Wake Forest at home before at NC State, Florida State, at Syracuse. Then they get a bye week before Stanford, at Georgia Tech, at North Carolina, Pitt, who we talked about, and I think is going to be really good, and then at Kentucky to end the year. So Louisville, they have the third best odds to win the ACC. They have a win total at 8.5. Looking at them last year, right? It was a year where they were above average in both stats, and it didn't end how you wanted it to. You're bringing in an unproven quarterback, but I think if there's one takeaway, it's that hey, Jeff Brom has been here for 3 years. They've had 9 wins all 3 years. Jeff Brom just finds ways to win. He does, and that's undeniable at this point. So there's a lot of confidence in that Louisville program, and I think rightfully so. I am concerned about the quarterback situation, right? You bring in someone who hasn't really started at all, and was at Ohio State, and but I think the positive with that is he was always behind someone really good. Like Julian Sain was amazing last year, and in 2024, Will Howard was amazing. So it's not like he's behind scrubs. He's really only been behind really good quarterbacks. And in 2023, he was a freshman, so I don't really think it was realistic to expect him to go in and win that job. So, with Louisville, I think it's something where I think their team is very interesting. They have a lot of talent on that team. I'm only highlighting the quarterback, but there is a lot of talent on Louisville as a roster, and I really do like Jeff Brom. So, if we're talking about their 8.5 win total, I do lean the over, but I definitely think it's going to be a very tough ask for them to go win the ACC when I don't have the most confidence in Lincoln. Like last year, they had Miller Moss, who came in from USC, and he really didn't produce, I think, the way they had hoped. So the question is, can they get back to 2024, where they had Tyler Shuck, who had a ton of success, right? In 2024, they ran the ninth best offense. And it wasn't just Tyler Shuck, right? Isaac Brown rushed for over 1,000 yards and 11 TDs. Last year, last year they didn't have an 1,000 yard rusher, right? Isaac Brown got hurt and he only played in 9 games, 884 yards, but did have 8.8 yards per attempt, which I did not realize until just now. Really good stat right there, and 7 TDs. Didn't again 8.8 is pretty crazy, but so the question is going to be, can that run game really find its own? And I will say, Lincoln, like I said, he's a dual threat quarterback. So if you do want to set up that run game, you have the right quarterback for it. So I'm very excited to see what Louisville does this year. They're a team that I'll be watching throughout the year. So our second most likely team to win the ACC is SMU. They are plus 750. They have a win total of 8.5. And SMU is a very, very, very interesting team for a couple reasons. But first off, we look at last year, they went 9-4, and it was all over the place, honestly. You look at it, they opened the year against East Texas A&M, beat them, and then lost a double OT game to Baylor. beat Missouri State, lost to TCU. So they actually started the year 2-2, and still somehow managed to get 9 wins. Would beat Syracuse, Stanford at Clemson before a 1 point loss against Wake Forest. Would beat Miami in overtime, beat Boston College, beat Louisville, and then would lose at Cal. And that at Cal loss was a huge loss because it kept them out of the ACC title game. And then they went on to beat Arizona, a good Arizona team, in the Trust and Will Holiday Bowl. What a bowl game that name is. So looking at their team last year, they were a good team. They ranked 26 in points per game, 32.2, and they gave up 20.5 points per game, which ranked 33rd. And there was a lot of excitement because I think when the offseason came and all the firings happened, a lot of people wondered would Rhett Lashlee move on from SMU? And he did not. And looking at Rhett Lashlee, this is going to be year 5, and in 4 years he's 38 and 16. He came in 2022, went 7 and 6, then would have back-to-back 11-win seasons, including a college football playoff appearance before last year going 9-4, and I would say a little disappointing end of the year. But another excitement is they're bringing back their starting quarterback, Kevin Jennings. He's been a starter there for now 2 years. Last year, he was 3,600 yards, 66% completion percentage, 26 TDs, 13 interceptions. The year before, 65% completion percentage, 3,200 yards, 23 TDs, 11 interceptions. So I think with Kevin Jennings, it's just we need to see those interceptions come down, and that's kind of the key. He didn't improve, I think, as much as you would hope from 24 to 25. In fact, his rushing actually got a little, went a little down. He had 354 rushing yards in 24 versus 55 and 25, 5 rushing TDs in 24 versus 4. So not as much of a runner, which is fine. But the interceptions definitely have to come down. 11 interceptions in 24, 13 in 25. You have to find a way to stay below double digits, especially because they do play what I would consider an interesting schedule. I don't think it's the most difficult schedule. I also think there's some definite traps in there along the way. They open the year at Florida State, should be a very interesting game. Mike Norvell, obviously, he's gonna be on the hot seat all year, so they're gonna come out and hopefully, they're going to hope to come out strong this year again, like they did last year. UC Davis and then at Louisville, which is going to be such a huge game. It's going to really show us who is the top dogs in the ACC very quickly, and that's going to be such a big game, especially late in the year. When I do think, especially in the ACC, you see usually a big cluster of teams that are trying to get in. So this is a huge game here in the third week. Then they get Missouri State before a Boston College game, and then an off day. And then they really don't get another, I would consider, extremely tough game for a while. Virginia, who's going to be very good, but you get them at home. Cal at home. Again, Cal's going to be good, but it's at home. They have to go that West Coast to East Coast trip. At Syracuse, Virginia Tech at home, Wake Forest at home, at Notre Dame, and at Stanford. So obviously the at Notre Dame, that's going to be such a big game for them. We're talking about college football playoff at this point in the year. You can go drop that Louisville game and maybe even drop a second game. So you could have 2 losses going. You could be 8-2 going into that at Notre Dame game. And if you beat Notre Dame, you can put yourself back in the college football playoff picture. And then go in, maybe 9-2 going into at Stanford. And I truly do believe if they're 9-2 going into that Stanford game, there's a good chance we're talking about them in that college football playoff picture at the very least. So it is a very, I would say, winnable schedule in terms of getting into the college football playoff, right? They don't play Miami in the regular season. They play Louisville, but they don't play Clemson either. They also don't play Pitt. So they do avoid a lot of those, I would say, top half ACC teams. They don't play NC State. If you actually go look at the odds, when we talk about the top 5 teams other than Louisville, it's Miami, other than, sorry, SMU, it's Miami, Louisville, Clemson, Pitt, and Virginia. They don't play Pitt, they don't play Clemson, and they don't play Miami. So it is a very, very, very doable schedule in terms of getting into at least the ACC title game. And then, of course, you win the ACC title game, you're in the college football playoff. So I think for SMU, this is a year where I think they're expecting to make the college football playoff. They're expecting to go compete. This is probably the last year with Kevin Jennings. So, take advantage of it. And Rhett Lashlee, we've seen him make the college football playoff before. We've seen him do it once. We think he can do it again, right? And let's say, hypothetically, they have 11 wins. Let's say they beat Louisville at Louisville and take care of business every other game, and their only loss is to Notre Dame. They're 11-1 going into the ACC title game. They're probably a lock for the college football playoff. So I think this is a very good SMU team. And honestly, I think 8.5 is a very low number. I definitely think this is a 10-win team. I think this is by far the second best team in the ACC. I think what we've seen Brett Lashley do gives us a lot of faith in him. Two of the last 3 years, he's won 11 games. So I think that 8.5 number is pretty low, and I think this will be a team competing for the college football playoff in the ACC, especially. So now we are at the final team, Miami, Florida. Miami, Florida is, and I'm just going to say Miami because I'm going to have you guys assume it's Florida and not Ohio. So Miami is minus 145 to win the ACC. They are by far the far and away favorite, right? SMU is plus 750 to win the ACC. Just a little comparison. If we go look at, let's say, like the Big Ten, Ohio State is only plus 180, right? Even going looking at the SEC, Georgia's only plus 290. So Vegas and the expectation for Miami is that they win the ACC, and really they don't think it's going to be very close. They have an over/under of 10.5, which is 2 games more than anybody else in the ACC. We talked about SMU already; they were at 8.5. So again, the expectation for Miami is 10.5. Looking at 2025, they went all the way to the college football championship game and were really close to winning that thing. I mean, they only lost 27 to 21 to Indiana, gave Indiana one of their toughest games of the year. Um, but in week one, they beat Notre Dame, they beat Florida, they beat Florida State, they beat all the Florida teams. But I want to bring up one key problem I have with Miami just in general, and it just feels like every year they drop games that you really think they shouldn't, right? So Louisville, they lost to them by 3 at home, and then at SMU, they lost an overtime game. And this is not something that, I know it's like, oh, those were two good teams last year, and I give you that. But let's go back to 2024. They went 10-3, and they lost in the Pop Tarts Bowl to Iowa State. I get it. Hey, it's just a Pop Tarts Bowl, but like, look at they lost at Georgia Tech, 28-23. And if you remember that game, we were saying, how do you lose that game? And then they lose at Syracuse, 42-38. And then if you go all the way back to 2023, you know, it's you're beating the teams and you're looking really good, right? You beat Texas A&M, but you lose to North Carolina by 10. You lose to Georgia Tech 23-20 in a game we said, how do you lose that? You lose to NC State, you lose to Florida State, you lose to Louisville. So it just feels like every year they drop a couple games that you're like, you don't really think they should. Looking at their team last year, though, it was great. I mean, they were fifth defensively. They gave up 14.8 points per game, opponents' points per game. That was insane, right? So that is a big concern with 2026. They lost Ruben Bain, they lost Mesidor. But I would say if there's something you could say, hey, where is the excitement for this team this year? It's the offense. Last year they scored 31 points per game. They ranked 35th, and that was with Carson Beck. Now Carson Beck, he was good for them, obviously, but he's not Darian Mensah. Darian Mensah is who their projected starter is, and he's going to be fantastic. He's going to be in his third year starting with a third different team, and everywhere he's gone, he has balled out. At Tulane in 2024, he had 2,700 yards, 66% completion percentage, 22 TDs, 6 picks. Add on that he rushed for 132 yards and a TD. And at Duke, he didn't run the ball basically at all. I don't know if you saw that, but he had negative rushing yards actually. Negative 32, did run for a TD, but he was a baller. He threw for 67% completion percentage, 3,900 yards, and 34 TDs, and just 6 picks. And keep in mind that was at Duke in the ACC, so you're not really worried about the comp, right? So maybe if when he went to Duke, maybe you're concerned. Hey, he did that in the American. Can he do it in the ACC? And he showed you last year he can. So Mensa is a baller. I think he is a huge upgrade to Carson Beck. I think this offense is going to even level up a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if they're scoring 33, 34 points per game. But there is a concern when you do lose two of your D linemen who both went first round, and that is the reason you got to the college football playoff championship game. There's that concern that maybe that defense takes a step back. They do have a lot of talent. And now we go to Mario Cristobal. Mario, he's a great coach. I mean, he's 35 and 19 in 4 years in Miami. This is going to be year five. At Oregon, he was 35 and 13. Um, I do have my concerns about his in-game play, his in-game coaching. I feel like, again, I go back to some of those previous Miami years, and when they lose games, it's never like, hey, that we lost to a better team, right? It's that, hey, SMU was just better or Louisville was just better. You kind of go out of the game feeling like you don't really understand how you even lost that game. I'll never forget when they lost to Georgia Tech. I think it was 23, and it was all they had to do was kneel. That's literally all they had to do. But instead, for some reason, they decided to run a handoff. They handed off to the running back with like 40 seconds to go, and Georgia Tech has no timeouts, and the running back gets stripped. And then Haynes King throws like 30 seconds later, Haynes King throws like a 50-yard touchdown to win the game. I'll never forget that because it just, to me, kind of is a great example of just when Miami loses, you kind of come away saying, how did we lose this game? Apart from the Indiana game, Indiana, I thought they played really well, and I thought that was a really good game. So the question is, can Miami build off of their huge successes last year? Taking a look at their schedule, it's it's very winnable, right? You got at Stanford, Florida A&M, at Wake Forest, Central Michigan, at Clemson. That's your first 5 games of the year. I think they should have a rather easy time. Then you get Florida State at home, Pitt at home, at North Carolina, and then it's the big game, right? November 7th is going to be such a huge game. Last year, when they played this game, it turned out it was for the college football playoff spot. Again, we go back and we look at their 2025 season. They played it week one. It was a 27 to 24 win, and it was a deciding factor of them even getting into the playoff, and then they went on the run to the championship game. That's going to be such a big game for both teams, and I can't wait to see it. They then finish the year Duke at home, Virginia Tech at home, and Boston College at home. This should be a year they are in the ACC title game. I think the past couple years it's been very disappointing. They haven't won the ACC um, in quite some time. I don't, Mario Cristobal's never won the ACC, so I think the question is just going to be, can they finally get over that hump, win the ACC, and show everybody what you can do? I think this offense will be a lot better. But I also think the defense is going to be a little bit of a downgrade. I don't think it's going to be bad. Again, in 2025, they ranked fifth. They gave up 14.8 points per game. I don't think they're going to be in the bottom half. I think they're just not going to be top 10 this year, personally. Maybe they will be. Maybe they'll just continue to be just the best team we've ever seen. But I do think that offense is going to be a lot better than last year. I think they're going to be top 20 at the very least, um, scoring 33, maybe even 34 points a game. I think they're going to absolutely, just fire on all cylinders, especially early. I think they're going to come out and just easily be five. And I think at Clemson could give them some problems, right? Clemson has a lot of talent, and even though last year was a down year, you still can't count them out, right? But I do think they start off at least 4-0 easily, no matter how improved Wake Forest is. And we will see Miami in the ACC title game more than likely. This is a very doable schedule. But I do come back to the thing that gnaws at me, which is it just feels like every year they end up dropping a game or two that they shouldn't. Look at last year, they lost against Louisville. And yes, Louisville was good, but if you go back and remember that game, I think Carson Beck threw 4 picks, right, at SMU and OT. It just felt like these are games they shouldn't be losing that they did, and it almost kept them out of the college football playoff. So, yeah, that's Miami going into the year 2027, or sorry, 2026, and they are the huge favorites to win the ACC. And so the expectation is it is win the ACC or bust for Miami this year. So that is it. We have previewed every team in the ACC. Some takeaways is I think the ACC doesn't get as much credit as maybe it deserves. It does feel a little deep, especially this year. I think there are a lot of teams that intrigue me from Syracuse to NC State all the way to SMU and Miami. I think there's a lot of interesting teams this year, and I think there's going to be a lot of great storylines. I can't wait to watch it. And if there's one takeaway in general, I think the ACC's been getting disrespected lately, and I think maybe they should get a little bit more respect as a conference. But I plan on doing this maybe for all the conferences. So if you made it to the end, let me know if you enjoyed it and consider subscribing and leaving a like. But thanks for watching. That's all I got.